I'm Susan Mulholland, and welcome to this month's edition of Art Beat. Tonight, we'll be visiting two talented young men. First, Jonathan Weiner, who is an author and has written a book called The Planet Earth. And then we'll travel to meet Steve Fitch, a neon artist. And finally, we'll take you to a recent show of the Doylestown Art League at the James Michener Art Center. I hope you'll enjoy it. Jonathan Weiner from Buckingham, Pennsylvania, is a young man who considers himself not as an activist nor as an environmentalist, but as a writer first and foremost. His concern with the future of our planet grew out of his quest for answers about the birth of the planet, when layers of rocks were pushed and tilted nearly vertically in some areas. He thinks of our planet in terms of a living machine. And so, as he did research for his book, The Planet Earth, his concern for the future grew. Although we now have a sophisticated method with which we can view the bottom of the sea by measuring the sea level from outer space, the fate of the Earth may simply lay in the hands of each of her citizens. The Planet Earth was written to accompany the WQED series, which was recently on PBS. Jonathan and I met at Peace Valley Park, which he considers an island in a sea of development. Jonathan, when you were doing your research for The Planet Earth, the book that accompanied this series, and you were talking to so many different scientists, what thread of commonality did you seem to see?
Well, scientists are a real diverse group. And they work in so many different disciplines. Even earth scientists, you'll find someone who's studying the ocean currents, and another one ocean chemistry, and another one the life in the ocean. Very specialized, but what I kept hearing was a real sense of concern that Earth is on the brink of grave and sudden changes, and that these changes extend through all of these different systems of the Earth, from the oceans to the atmosphere to the biosphere. I was startled back then, that's a few years ago now, in 85, 86, I guess, to realize that the concerns that I had heard about when I was in high school, around the time of Earth Day, hadn't really gone away, and that in fact these hard-headed scientists were very concerned about the state of the planet and where it's heading. And that scared me, knowing that the people who really are doing the measurements and are really spending their lives studying how Earth works are talking as darkly as the environmentalists and ecologists were back in the 60s and 70s. I think if there was any common note, it was one of deep concern.
So in your book that you're writing, The Next 100 Years, that should be out next year, what is your premise? What is it that you're trying to tell? What's your message?
Well, the subtitle of the book that we've arrived at after a lot of back and forth is The Next 100 Years, What We Are Doing to Our Planet and What We Can Do to Save It.
Great.
And I think I began the book really wanting to know the facts. What is happening to the planet? What are we doing? Why is it something we should worry about? It all seems quite remote, and it seemed remote to me until I had been working on the book for a year or two even. Why are these subjects of immediate concern? And then finally, given they really are of deep concern, what do we do? The biggest problem facing us is the greenhouse effect, and the most obvious solution to the problem is for us to stop putting as much greenhouse gas into the air as we do each year. Each of us in the United States, man, woman, and child, is putting 5 tons of carbon into the air each year. By driving our cars, the average American car puts its weight of carbon into the air each year. That's by consuming large amounts of power for heating and cooling our homes, space conditioning. That is even by buying products with a lot of disposable wrapping on them. And almost everything that we consume leads to the production of some carbon dioxide.
All right, so you've identified those 3 things. Tell us then, what could we do, starting with the first? What could we do to help change that? The cars, you mentioned.
We should have a gas tax in this country. That would be a very simple measure, a much higher gas tax than we do. There are many countries, industrial countries in the world, that have a significantly higher gas tax, and that would cut down on gasoline consumption. It's an unpopular suggestion.
It would hit us in the pocketbook.
Yeah, and get us thinking in terms of carpooling and buying cars that are more fuel efficient, and cutting corners in a way that might leave our lives just as well off, but leave the atmosphere much better off.
Well, you know, we don't have great mass transportation here. Are you an advocate of the government helping us do that?
Absolutely.
More trains, using
Trains,
buses.
buses, yep. Even bicycle lanes are really underused in this country. I understand that in Holland, for instance, there's 9,000 miles of bicycle lanes, and that's enough to crisscross this country 3 times. If we had a real effort put into measures like that, we could cut way down on the amount of carbon dioxide that we put into the air here. Looking at ways in your home that you can cut down too, just setting the thermostat a little bit lower in the wintertime, not leaving the lights burning, looking for light bulbs that are more efficient. They're out there. There are so many ways, I think, that we could become aware of if as a society we became concerned about the problem. Our government could be supporting solar energy much more vigorously than it does, and we as individual consumers could look into solar heating.
Well, you are aware that Bucks County and Abby Hoffman were against a lot of people in Bucks County were against the Point Pleasant pumping station, which is now beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why was this concern tie into what you're talking about?
Yeah, it does. The real reason for that pump is to foster further development in the area. When you clear a stand of trees in order to put in a house, you're cutting down, in effect, you're cutting down carbon stores. You're cutting down trees that have locked a lot of carbon into their trunks and branches and leaves in order to build themselves up from the ground. And they get that carbon out of the air. We sort of think of them as drawing their sustenance from the ground. But the carbon they get from the air in the form of carbon dioxide, and they split that carbon dioxide with the energy from the sun, sunlight, and photosynthesis, and they keep most of the carbon and they use it for building themselves up. So what we do is we cut the tree down and we put that carbon back into the air where it produces a greenhouse effect, and it gradually is changing the climate of the planet. Gradually in the past, maybe suddenly now in 10, 20 years. So development, even here in Bucks County, is contributing to this effect and is a global as well as a local problem. It's really an astonishment to me how much the greenhouse effect may mean for us in the next 10, 20 years, 30 years. Now it's pretty well established that the ice ages will come back and we will have ice a mile thick someday, coming down maybe as far as Manhattan as it did 20,000 years ago. But that is far in the future. That's thousands of years from now. In the near future, what we can expect and this is what astonishes me, is we can expect changes of climate as drastic as that in the opposite direction in our lifetimes. An ice age is produced by a temperature drop of only 5 degrees centigrade on the global average. That's produce those monstrous ice sheets and bring them down. What we can expect in the next 30 years, according to the current computer models, is a rise in temperature on the global average of 5 degrees centigrade. So we're talking about a swing of climate, a global swing of climate in the opposite direction in our lifetimes and our kids' lifetimes. What that does to the planet, nobody knows in specific because it's an experiment that we're trying here for the first time, we the human race. The greenhouse effect is the way our atmosphere keeps us warm. Without a blanket of air, we would be sitting right now on a planet about as cold as the moon. We need this blanket of air to absorb some of the heat of the sun's rays and hold it in and keep us at a comfortable temperature. If we don't change our ways, then it sounds terribly moralistic and it sounds terribly gloomy, but these problems are going to haunt us, and they're going to extract a steeper and steeper price on us and on our kids. So I think the more I've listened to Earth scientists, the more I see that we have become a geological force, and we as a species have to become an intelligent force. We have to become a geological force that looks ahead 100 years. And right now, I don't think we do that. We're smart individually, Homo sapiens sapiens, we're the man, the doubly wise, we call ourselves, but we don't look ahead 50 years. It sounds almost outlandish, in fact, to talk about looking ahead 50 years, 100 years. And that's what we have to do. Given the impact that we have on the planet, given the lasting changes that we're creating, things that are going to go on for thousands of years, let alone 100, we have to begin to think as a geological force.
When I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, neon was very popular as a use for signs, but then it seemed to die out. All this will change if Steve Fitch, the artist we're going to visit, has his way. He's going to take neon in new directions.
I got interested in neon art through my photography. When I graduated from college, which was at the University of California in Berkeley, I started working on a self-initiated project photographing along the highway. I bought an old '66 Ford Econoline van and I started going on trips around the United States, making pictures of truck stops, motels, tourists, just a lot of the things you'd find along the road, in particular the old two-lane American highway. And in the process of making these pictures, I started noticing a lot of billboards and signs, and especially neon signs. So my interest in neon really came about through the photographing of the highway. By the mid-'70s, I knew I wanted to learn to make neon myself, because in the process of photographing these signs, I started getting ideas of neon pieces that I could make. And so it took me 5 or 6 years really to find a way to learn, but my original interest came about from my photography. I guess the way all my pieces come about, or all my work, is one thing leads to another. And I think that's sort of this artistic process that happens. I've learned a lot about it in being an artist. When I teach, I try to teach students about that. It's probably the most important thing I can teach, is somehow give them a clue to how things happen. And part of that is to realize that making art is a process that one thing leads to another, finding out what your sources are, or in a way letting things find you. Like I always sort of feel that the highway found me, that neon found me in a way. Radiation Pines, for example, that neon piece came about from a number of different threads. So Radiation Pines is this piece that sort of coalesced together out of all these different images. The moons are in it. I'd been thinking about the moons. The burnt tree trunk poles, I had that image in my mind. The piece was made at a time when the nuclear freeze activity was real strong in 1982 and 83. So the phrase Radiation Pines just was a pair of words that occurred to me when I was backpacking one time. And I keep a notebook, which I write little words down that interest me, and I'd written that down. And I wanted to do a neon piece that had those words in it. I like words in my neon pieces, and in a lot of ways people ask me, are my neon pieces sculptures, or what are they? I don't like to call them sculptures, I don't like to call them installations. In a way, they're signs. I see them as being signs that I make. So I wanted to use those words, Radiation Pines. I was going to do a countdown in neon that went 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, but then I decided I could do a countdown with moons. One thing in shamanistic art is one way to become a shaman if you're an Eskimo, let's say, is to imagine your own death. And one way they do that is to imagine themselves as a skeleton. And so in shamanistic art all over the world, you will see drawings of skeletons. And it occurred to me it'd be neat to make a neon skeleton. And so that became sort of the central image in Radiation Pines. Then there was the moons, there was the word, there was an arrow, there's a little blue arrow blinking back and forth, which to me sort of symbolizes redemption. It's pointing up towards heaven. So when it came down to going into my studio and building it, you know, these things just all kind of came together and the piece took its form. Toaster came about a little bit differently. A person in New Mexico who builds adobe houses to sell had a model adobe house, and he wanted different artists to make a piece for this adobe house. I was asked if I was interested, and I said sure, and he says, do you want to make something for the kitchen? And he specifically wanted me to make something out of neon. And I said, yeah, great. I went and looked at the house and started thinking about what I could do, and I'm not sure where the idea came from, but I thought of doing a toaster, and then the idea of the toast popping out came to me. Rattlesnake Stories is a neon, I guess it is an installation, that was placed on a piece of land my wife and I own in New Mexico. It's a little more complicated to explain where it came from. On our land, we continually encounter diamondback rattlesnakes, and I've a couple times killed the rattlesnakes. Once one reared right up in front of me on the trail and almost bit me. I've never killed rattlesnakes before. The reason I've done it there is that we have two little boys, and it's sort of frightening that they could get bit. So the diamondback rattlesnake has been on my mind a lot, and I don't know if the diamondback is really my enemy or my ally. I mean, I sort of think of it as my enemy, but in a funny kind of way, it actually might end up being my ally. So I've been thinking about the rattlesnake a lot, and this piece came about because of these encounters with the rattlesnakes. I wanted to do a neon piece that you could see during the daytime. So I ended up having this image of digging holes into the ground. The neon goes into the holes. You only see it in the photographs coming out of the holes, but it goes down into the ground, and it gets dark down in the ground. You can lean over during the middle of the day and see it lit up down there. I wanted, the piece to me represents a diamondback. Some of the neon is round, some of the neon is segmented, some of the neon is curved. So it's a sort of symbolic way of representing a rattlesnake, and in particular a diamondback. Also, cylinders are made out of rocks and mud. There's black earth laid around the cylinders. Basically, they're made like the Anasazi Indians made their cliff dwellings. Very primitive, basic materials. Yet the neon is a real contemporary modern art material, or modern material, technological. I sort of like that interplay. I feel my life as an artist is somehow, and my life period, is somehow involved with a bringing together of the primitive and the modern. The color photograph, which I took in Albuquerque with the neon zigzag. Same thing, that to me symbolizes a couple of things. Number one, it is a photograph that I think shows you some of the beautiful possibilities of photography, just in terms of subject matter. You know, I claim this picture as mine. I saw that building, I saw that situation, and recognized it. That zigzag neon is an Indian symbol. Here it is in neon. I love that, same kind of idea. I like the absurdity of the picture, the neon over that cemented-in door. It's done at dusk, that time period when I like to do a lot of my photography. So in a way I see that photograph, which is not one I made in the sense I didn't dig the holes and make the neon like I did rattlesnake stories. Nonetheless, I still look at that photograph as something I made. You know, a lot of people think of photographs as something you take. I really think of them as something I made. Insane-O-Matic is another art piece that I guess I would call a sign. It's similar to Radiation Pines in a number of ways. The phrase Insane-O-Matic came to me again when I was backpacking. The phrase Insane-O-Matic to me kind of represents this fascination with technology when it gets too crazed. So I wanted to make a crazed piece. And so Insane-O-Matic is crazed. I mean, the words do a speller action. They go Insane-O-Matic, and then it all goes off and it all goes on. That's what you call a speller action. In Las Vegas, you'll find thousands of signs that have speller actions. So again, that was a sort of a folk source. I wanted that spelling. And again, the diamondback rattlesnake, just because of what I was telling you previously about rattlesnakes, I wanted to make a big rattlesnake. There are lightning bolts that blink back and forth on that piece that just represent a raw kind of energy. But I think the whole idea of Insane-O-Matic is like a kind of haywire machine. It buzzes, it blinks, it's big, has a presence. The process of making a neon piece is a completely hands-on process. It's a skill that can't be automated. To begin with, I will take sections of glass, usually they're 4 feet long, sometimes 5 feet long, and I will bend the glass in one of 3 different kinds of fires. We have a crossfire, a ribbon fire, and a hand fire. So in making a piece, I will bend the neon in one of these fires. There are different kinds of bends you do. The difficulty in bending neon is 2-part. It's on the one hand acquiring the skill, which only comes through practice, of actually being able to execute the bend. Number 2, the difficulty in learning the skill of neon is figuring out the sequence of bends you're going to do for any given piece. It's sort of like figuring out a Chinese puzzle. If you're going to bend a letter A, you have to be able to figure out a sequence of bends to go through, or you might find yourself in a situation where you can't execute the bend.
When the tubes are in the process of being bent, the bend becomes flat due to the extreme heat. So Steve must blow into the rubber hose and puff up the bend in order to give it a round look. Then he has about 5 seconds to carry the hot tube over to a fire-resistant table where the design is laid out.
When I have made it, I weld on what are called electrodes. You put 2 electrodes on any neon piece. The electrodes are what eventually get hooked up to wires that go to a transformer and provide the electricity through the tube. After I've welded the electrodes on, I take the whole unit over to what's called a manifold, and I attach it through one of the electrodes. There's a little narrow piece of glass tube coming out of one of the electrodes. I heat that up and literally weld it or attach it into my manifold. I create a vacuum. I turn on a vacuum pump and create them inside my neon tube. I then hook the electrodes to what's called a step-up transformer, and I give the tube a tremendous amount of electricity, which heats the tube up. Any impurity, such as water, dirt, that is on the inside of the tube gets vaporized and gets pulled out of the tube by the vacuum pump. So in a sense, I purify the tube. I let it cool down. I then, out of one of 2 flasks of gas, one is neon, one is argon, I let in a little bit of gas into the tube. Neon, when lit up, gives you an orange-red. Argon, when lit up, gives you a sky blue. So you work with basically 2 gases. I let the gas into the tube, I take a hand torch, and I separate the tube from the manifold, and now I have a complete neon tube that has been bent, purified, vacuumed out, and then filled with a slight amount of either neon or argon gas. And that's basically it.
I walked down Pine Street to meet Cass Moore and Freeman in front of the James A. Michener Art Center. She is an artist member of the Doylestown Art League. As we walked under the colorful banners and into the new Buyers Gallery, she discussed the founding and membership of the Art League.
The Doylestown Art League was founded in 1955 by a group of 20 interested people. From that time, we have grown to over 230 people. Most of us are professional or amateur artists. The Doylestown Art League sponsors 3 juried shows a year. This particular juried show is an open juried show. That means that not only do the league members enter works, but anyone else outside of the Art League who wishes to enter does. We sent out prospectuses and had over 400 entries. Of the 400 entries, the judges, Sandra Giangiolio and Dori Laciava, 5 pieces. Of the 65 pieces, 29 works of art are by members of the Doylestown Art League, so I consider that a very good showing for our league. Our Best of Show award is called Winter Day, and it was painted by Lee Everett. His brushwork is very active. It's very involved. I like his work because the energy that he pursues life with is seen in actually just the way he paints his work. The Patrons Award in Watercolor, sponsored by the Vincent's Warrington Inn, was awarded to Bertie Dash for her watercolor entitled Plant Sale, San Miguel. Bertie is very interested in color, and she said that's the primary feeling that she tries to get in her work, the color in the light of day. But when I look at her work, I am impressed with the way she simplifies into strong masses of lights and darks. I think this adds to the strength of her work. The Patrons Award in Oil, sponsored by the Deep Run Packing Company, was given to George Booz for his oil painting Moonlight on Old Center Bridge Hill. Mr. Booz describes his work as documentary. He's a Plumsteadville artist and he likes to record local scenes. His method of oil painting is traditional. This is a print by Ethel Bowen called The Shoppers, and it won the Patrons Award in Graphics. Ethel Bowen does lithographs. This is one of a series of an artist at work group that she has done, and it portrays browsers at the Lambertville Shad Festival. The Patrons Award in Other Media was given to Stitch Face by Stacy Spears Scott. The award is sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Henry Gronendahl. Stacy is a chalfont artist. She likes to work in a process of layering and scraping away. The major interest in this work, I think, is the textural surfaces and the various objects that she's able to include in her composition. This watercolor, with which I won the Silver Medal Award, is entitled Escape Mechanism. It's the fire escape on the side of the Lambertville Hotel in New Jersey. When I was doing this, I was especially concerned with the positive shapes of the fire escape against the negative shapes and spaces that support it. The play of light and shadows that are formed stretch the color in the light and the shadows.